I don't necessarily agree with Michigan being ranked ahead of Oklahoma, but there are sometimes when you disagree with something, but you can understand the other side. You understand that it's a valid point. And then there's other times where you disagree with the opposing side and you think it's completely ridiculous. In this case, I understand it. I can understand the logic. Michigan's loss, if you watched that game against Michigan State, that was an epic battle. It was a great game. It was just a great, great game. They were playing on the road. And you may be able to walk away from that game still thinking Michigan is a better team, outcoached possibly, but a better team.
Right.
So if you truly buy into Michigan State being as good as their ranking, then that's how you can buy into Michigan being ranked ahead of Oklahoma. Now, if you play the game of, well, is Michigan really that good because they lost to Michigan State and Michigan State's best win is Michigan? So is Michigan State really that good? We need to see more from Michigan State. We kind of play that game all year long where we're like, well, we'd like to see more because are they really that good just because they beat that team? We don't know how good that team is. And so we kind of kick the can down the road regarding that argument. Before we get to the next question or anything that you want to hit on, Jason, I would just like to pick off these teams one by one. And you addressed Alabama. So this is my take on Alabama. They do not have the second best resume in the country.
Right.
They beat Ole Miss, and they have a collection of wins against decent teams. When I say decent, I mean they're good teams with talent, but they're not contending teams. Florida, Tennessee, Miami, Mississippi State. They're not teams that are going to vie for conference championships by any stretch. They're decent teams. They have talent. They're probably top 25 talent teams, but more like top 40 or 50 teams on the field. That's their collection of wins outside of a game against Ole Miss. And they struggled mightily against Florida, which is turning out to not be the best mark on their resume. Jason, I'm almost thinking at this point, when the committee says eyeball test, we always think of that as you pop in the tape and you watch the game and you judge and evaluate how good the team is just by watching them. I think it goes beyond that. It's more about eyeball test and our knowledge of what's the talent on the roster, what's the name brand, how much trust do we have in them backing it up.
Right.
That's what the eyeball test is. And that's why Alabama's number 2.
No, you're absolutely right. And a lot, to your point, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the brand and how successful they've been, over the last, however many years under Nick Saban. So I think you're absolutely right. And the resume is not going to get any, like I said, it's not going to get any better. But
they've got Auburn.
Yeah. You're and I forgot about that when I mentioned that. Yeah. Auburn and then Georgia to end the year if they're able to beat Auburn. But
Jason, what really annoys me about that number 2 ranking as well is they're setting this up as justification for Alabama staying in the top 4 if they lose to Georgia.
That's actually when you were talking about this, and Brandon, I was thinking to myself, yeah, the committee could make an argument here, depending on what happens with some of these other teams. Obviously, you can't put. I mean, just the amount of backlash would be just astronomical if you were to put a 2-loss Alabama team over like an undefeated Wake Forest or undefeated Oklahoma. And I think brand matters, right? I mean, I could not see a situation in which a 2-loss Alabama team would get in over an undefeated Oklahoma. I could see a situation, I think that's probably where you're going, where a 2-loss Alabama team could get in over an undefeated like Wake Forest, or maybe a 1-loss Baylor or a 1-loss Oklahoma State team, just because.
Yes.
And then it's in a lot of ways it's frustrating, I think, for us watching it, because at the end of the day, like, wins should matter, but I mean, I think they don't really. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's who you played, how you look on the field, and if you win, that's positive. Obviously, you can't have 2 or 3 losses, but well, I mean, if you're Wisconsin, you can have 2 or 3 losses and still be in the top 25, but you can't lose these games. But at the end of the day, how you look is right now is being perceived as more important on as opposed to how many wins that you have, or
And
maybe how many losses you have.
and to me, this is coming from a person, meaning me, that actually believes that Alabama is the second best team in the country. But
Yeah.
I think we should be going by resume and results on the field. That's what I do when I build my rankings, because I'm not going by, well, I think this and I think that. Um, and Alabama's, because okay, they're number 2 right now. They're going to not to win against an LSU team that's not very good, but they're still talented, and they're going to be given a certain amount of credit for that win, just like Florida's 4-4 right now, just like LSU is, and Tennessee. So Alabama's going to be given some amount of credit, especially if they beat them by 4 touchdowns.
Mhm.
So they've got LSU, they've got Arkansas, put them somewhat in the same category. They're a good team. They've got talent. They're starting to lose games though. So Alabama's going to, and then obviously the Auburn game, that's a top 15 win as it stands right now. So Alabama's going to do nothing but cement that number 2 ranking between now and championship weekend. And
Mhm.
so then if they go out and play a really close game against Georgia, who's going to do nothing but cement the number 1, I could
Mhm.
see Alabama going from 2 to 4, or maybe 2 to 3, because they want to avoid the rematch.
Yeah.
I could see it.
Yeah, no, I definitely could, as well, and, uh, it's always just interesting just to see just to be able to kind of pinpoint and understand the thought process before, going into these rankings. I mean, I think one of the things that I find very interesting is, I was doing a little bit of a comparison against the college football playoff rankings in the AP today, and you've got a team like you've got Wisconsin with 3 losses that is in the top 25 versus a team like Texas San Antonio. Let's just say they're number 16th in the AP, but they're nowhere near the top 25. Well, I'll say nowhere near, but they're not in the top 25 for the college football playoff. Mississippi State's another example. They're 17th. They're not ranked at all in the AP. So I think those things are kind of interesting just to look at thought process and is it's always in this we, we can continue to have this conversation and we'll have it over and over again. I'm almost to the point where there's there's no path whatsoever for a group of 5 team to make it. I mean, I just Cincinnati can't do. There's there's not much that they can do themselves. They just need a ton of help. They need. I mean, there's a path for them to get there, I think, but it's hard. It's going to be very hard for them to find a way, especially with SMU losing last week. I mean, I think that was if until now they play. Now the only benefit that Cincinnati could get is you want Houston to continue to win these games, and you play them in the AAC championship game. But I think those things are obviously they're going to work themselves out. I mean Cincinnati's what 6 now, so there's a there's a path, but there's not a path for them to just go and win all of these games, especially with the Notre Dame win as well. So I think that's interesting. But the debate is always going to be there. What does this? There's so much movement in terms of conference realignment stuff. What does this do if, let's say, for an example, you had a 2-loss Alabama team that got in over an undefeated Wake Forest or an undefeated Cincinnati? What does that do to expansion? Does that drive it to happen sooner than we thought it would happen with all the realignment stuff that's happening, or what?